True American horror stories. Terrifying events they wish you'd never heard, but now you will.
I pressed my shoulder against the peeling mahogany door of 14B and felt its sigh open with the same reluctant groan I'd heard 100 times before. Aunt Linda's spare key, cool brass warmed by my palm, turned in the lock the way it always did. One hitch of resistance, a tiny clink, then that deep mechanical thunk that meant the latch had given in. Nothing about the motion felt strange. I'd been slipping in and out of this apartment since freshman year, feeding Mr. Whiskers, watering the spider plant that refused to die, rescuing burnt banana bread from the oven when Auntie's book club ran late. Tonight was supposed to be just another favor. Tighten a leaky valve in the bathroom and grab the cardboard box of winter boots Linda promised me. Outside, March clung to Savannah like wet gauze. The city smelled of river mud and the first narcissus blooms, but inside the foyer hovered a drier perfume. Old wood polish, sun-baked dust, and a faint ribbon of cinnamon from orange peels drying on the kitchen radiator. The building was a narrow Victorian walk-up on East Jones Street. 3 floors of cracked plaster and wrought iron curls, built long before air conditioning and elevator shafts. Its bones creaked, always, endearing in daylight, unsettling at dusk. I shut the door behind me and, out of habit, kicked off my shoes to spare the downstairs neighbor the thump of leather soles. Barefoot, I could feel every ripple in the century-old floorboards, cool ridges, nail heads dimpled smooth, the mild sag in front of the coat rack where generations of tenants had rested their tired spines. An idle part of me ticked off the house's familiar soundtrack, the wheeze of the antiquated fridge, the low drone of NPR, the hiccup of the hallway radiator. Only tonight the symphony was silent. No public radio jazz, no compressor hum, just a single hollow drip, drip, drip echoing from the bathroom beyond the archway. The hallway lamp, normally bright and butter-colored, was dead. In its place, a gauzy glow slanted down the staircase from a gas sconce on the landing above, throwing restless shadows along the beadboard walls. The flame quivered whenever the wind rattled loose window panes on the street side, smearing silhouettes over framed photos. My cousin Claire at high school graduation, Aunt Linda barefoot on Tybee Island, a younger me, gap-toothed, clutching a pumpkin twice my size. I called out, softly at first. "It's just me, Jenna." The name hung in the hall like dust motes lit by the lamplight and drifted away unanswered. On any other evening, Claire would have shouted back from her room, music blaring, hairdryer roaring, and Aunt Linda would have demanded I steal a cookie before doing whatever heroic maintenance thing you're here for. The absence of their voices felt as weighty as furniture. I set my backpack on the entry bench and crossed to the kitchen, half expecting to find fresh groceries sweating on the counter. Instead, 2 reusable bags bulged on the table, flour and red onions spilling from their tops in domestic disarray. Evidence they dashed out, maybe forgetting to flick on the living room lamp. Beyond the fridge stood the bathroom door, cracked open just enough to expose a wink of porcelain and a glint of water on tile. The leaky valve, at least, was real. I threaded between chair legs, my fingertips grazing the buttery varnish of the farmhouse table, and reached for the faucet under the sink. A film of condensation cooled my skin. The pipe must have dripped for hours. I twisted the valve clockwise, heard the hiss of water choke to a stop, and wiped my damp fingertips on my jeans. Easy, job done, box of boots next, then back into the lilac dusk and the movie night waiting at my door. Heading out, I paused beside the front window. It overlooked East Jones, where antique lampposts cast orange halos on brick sidewalks. and fat camellia blossoms lay bruised under passing wheels. The glass felt warm from the streetlights, yet a tremor of cool air whispered across my ankle, a draft from somewhere deeper in the apartment. I straightened, suddenly attuned to how large the flat seemed when it wasn't filled with conversation. Long corridors retreating into shadow, ceilings vaulted just high enough for echoes, doorways yawning like unlit stages. That was the exact moment the hairs on my forearms rose, though I couldn't have said why. Perhaps it was the muted tick of the grandfather clock in the parlor, 1 second too slow. Perhaps the subtle change in the jasmine-tinged air, as if it had inhaled a ghost of menthol or candle smoke. Or perhaps it was nothing overt at all, only the ancient, instinctive awareness that what should have been familiar was, in some infinitesimal way, misaligned. I shook off the prickle, convincing myself it was the twilight noise of an old building shifting against humid spring weather. Keys in hand, box of boots in sight, I'd be out in minutes. Yet, as I took the first step toward the storage closet, my sneakerless heel squeaked softly on a plank, and I froze, heart bumping like a trapped moth. Somewhere up the stairwell, a gas flame fluttered, not with wind, but with movement, and droplets of shadow seemed to gather at the top landing, coalescing around the single flickering lamp. And that, though I didn't know it yet, was the instant the night began to veer into the impossible. The moment I set my foot on the first stair, the gas sconce above me settled into a steady burn, almost as if it had been holding its breath too. A quiver of light rippled down the striped wallpaper, fluttering across oval portraits of long-dead strangers whose mahogany frames gleamed like wet bark. For a heartbeat, the house seemed to gather itself, spine straight, lungs taut, before relaxing into a hush so dense I could feel it pressing against my eardrums. "Claire?" I tried again, voice pitched just above a library whisper. No reply, only the faintest resonance of my own syllables, sliding into the upper hallway and dissolving in the dark. The quiet was wrong, not the cozy hush of an empty home, but a calm curated by something that cared whether noise existed at all. I climbed 2 steps. The banister, lacquered smooth by generations of palms, felt colder than the air around it, as if it stored winter in its grain. My fingertips skated along its curve, leaving smudged crescents of body heat that vanished the moment they formed. Above me, the landing waited, one lonesome bulb in a brass cup, flame licking a teardrop-shaped mantle, casting a kind of sallow halo that refused to reach the ceiling. Halfway up, a floorboard below let out a single wooden yip. That wasn't unusual. The staircase always protested, yet the echo of that yelp seemed to scurry into corners I'd never noticed, behind the molding, under the wainscot, into the skeleton of the house itself. My pulse thudded louder, matching pace with the soft tick of the parlor clock behind me. Every organic rhythm in the building, wood settling, glass vibrating in its sash, water inching through rusty pipes, felt a shade too pronounced, like background instruments brought suddenly to the front of an orchestra. Another step. The scents shifted. Cinnamon faded, giving way to something earthier, a damp, metallic odor, faint but distinct, like iron filings left overnight in dew. I paused, testing the air with shallow breaths. Savannah humidity could birth 100 odd smells, but this one felt stuck, the way a coin tastes when you press it against your tongue. Light from the stair-top sconce spilled over the lip of the landing, pooling onto the treads like diluted honey. It should have been comforting, yet every warm flicker threw up a shadow that writhed into a colder shape. The silhouette of the balusters, normally neat slats, bled together in places, dark, gluey streaks stretching beyond the spindle's natural length. I blinked hard. The lines resolved into ordinary wood grain. "Get a grip," I muttered. At the seventh step, a draft touched my ankle, strangely directional, as if squeezed through a keyhole and aimed precisely at skin. Gooseflesh prickled up my calf. Above, the landing's single light fluttered twice, dim bright, before steadying with a hiss. I counted that hiss, realized the flame emitted it rhythmically, almost like breathing. I reached the landing. From here, the hallway stretched left and right in a shallow V, dotted with closed doors. Linen closet, bathroom, guest room, Claire's room at the far end. The single sconce painted everything a muted amber that bled into pitch 10 feet on either side. I should have flicked the hallway switch, but my hand hovered flat above the plate without touching it. Instinct, some primitive line of code, told me adding light might summon attention, and I wasn't sure I wanted whatever attention the house could give. Another scent layered over the metallic tang. Old jasmine oil, yes, but soured, as if it had seeped into damp plaster and fermented. It hit the back of my throat and lingered. I swallowed, but the taste clung, velvety and stale. I tested the floor with my weight. No groan, just the padded hush of socked feet. I moved right toward Claire's door, each step measured. Halfway there, I registered a low harmonic. Not quite a hum, not quite a whistle. Threading through the silence. It came and went like a distant freight train, swaddled in cotton. I paused. The sound faded. I inched forward again. There it was, a soft, breathy exhale timed to my movement. I reached the threshold to Claire's room. The door stood half ajar, cracked just wide enough to reveal a wedge of carpet and the hem of a gauzy curtain undulating in unseen air. The window behind that curtain should have been closed. Aunt Linda kept them latched against coastal storms. A chill pinched the nape of my neck. Heart tripping, I nudged the door with 2 fingers. The hinges moved without a squeal. The portal opened 3 silent inches, then 5, then 8, until the room came into view in slices of warm gloom. I expected clothes draped over the desk chair, maybe string lights winking above the headboard. Instead, nothing. No clutter. Bed neatly made, desk cleared, curtains breathing as though the house had lungs. The hum was clearer here, a thin, almost organic drone, neither electronic nor environmental. It sat on one frequency, just high enough to tingle nerves behind my eyes. I couldn't source it. Floor, wall, the air itself. I took a shallow breath, and the note quivered as if in sympathy. I eased a foot across the threshold. The plank moaned, not the usual quick squeak, but a long, low vowel of wood, terrified to carry weight. I stopped, afraid the sound itself might signal my presence to something I could not identify. In that halt, I became aware of how loud my own body was, heart drumming, stomach tightening with tiny flesh clicks, lungs rasping. Each pulse echoed up through the soles of my feet, into the planks, into the beams, into the old heart of the house. The structure felt simultaneously hollow and congested, like a giant ear pressed to its own organs, straining to hear me think. I shut my eyes. Stupid. I opened them. The hallway behind was unchanged, the landing lamp steady. Yet perception had shifted, walls leaned, geometry flexed by fractions, like a stalled Ferris wheel drifting a single notch when no one is looking. Instinct told me not to advance further, but stubborn concern tugged harder. I leaned into the room, scanning the bed, the wardrobe, the curtained window, and that was when my peripheral vision caught a silhouette at the stair top opposite the landing. A figure seated, shoulders slightly collapsed, midnight hair cascading forward to hide what might have been a face. The gasp died in my throat. My body understood before my mind. Something fundamental had pivoted. The hush was no longer a vacuum, but a presence, listening, observant, choosing its stage. In that razor-thin slice of time, before the house exhaled again, I knew whatever lay ahead would not be governed by the rules of ordinary visits or polite family routines. And still, impossibly, I found myself whispering the name once more. Not because I expected an answer, but because the silence itself demanded a witness. For 3 seconds, long, rattling seconds, I tried to retrofit the silhouette into something harmless. Claire pausing mid-scroll on her phone. Claire dozing upright after a brutal term paper bender. Claire listening for a text ping with earbuds in. All perfectly mundane, if not for the geometry. Claire was 5'4", but this figure's crown rose higher than the baluster finials even while seated. The slope of her shoulders looked wrong too, flatter, as if an invisible puppeteer had pushed clavicles forward and pinned them there. I cleared my throat. Claire, hey, your mama had no response. Not even the flicker of acknowledgement you give a stranger on a bus. Silence pooled. The hum I'd noticed earlier diminished, replaced by a softer, suboral flutter, like moth wings batting inside a teacup. I wondered if it was my pulse thumping in my ears. I climbed another step. The wood answered with a timid chirp, and the lamp guttered once in solidarity. Now the angle let me see more. Her spine was rod straight, coatless despite the evening chill. She wore Claire's favorite indigo house dress, only oversized. The collar hung too wide, revealing a pallid triangle of skin where her neck should have met her shoulder. The fabric drooped like theater drapery on a mannequin 2 sizes too small. A gust of jasmine-soaked air slithered down the stairwell, nudging strands of her hair, inky, curtain straight, just enough to reveal a sliver of cheek. Only it wasn't quite a cheek. The surface looked matte, not living. The color, more the shade of candle wax, left too long in a dusty cupboard. No pores, no fine peach fuzz, no human warmth. A single glossy ribbon of lamplight skimmed that waxen plane, then slipped off as if repelled. Somewhere beyond the back windows, a trolley chattered over riverfront rails. But inside the house, the quiet fell hard and absolute. I forced air into my lungs. The breath came shallow, tasted of iron and wilted jasmine. Claire. This time, the name broke at the midpoint. A voice crack I hadn't produced since 6th grade choir auditions. My scalp tightened so sharply it felt stitched to my skull. Nerves fizzed across my shoulders, instinct begging me to retreat, to flee down the stairs and out into sticky Savannah dusk. But curiosity welded me in place. The barbaric attraction humans feel toward cliff edges and open flames. Another tentative step lifted me to eye level with the landing banister. From here, the figure's hair parted slightly. A black waterfall parting around an ellipse of face still bowed forward. I could see no ears, no jawline shape, just the suggestion of a smooth oval. She remained silent, but the hush around her thickened, felt engineered. Not the absence of sound, but the muting of reality. My brain clawed for rationalization. Claire sleepwalking? A life-sized cutout prank? but the air vibrated with sentience. The sense that if I breathed too loudly, the thing might uncurl and unfold itself in some impossible insectile geometry I could never forget. My phone lay useless in my pocket. Even the thought of its glass glow felt sacrilegious, as though bright LED light might tear some delicate membrane that still kept night and nightmare separate. I lifted my hand half an inch, a wordless peace offering, proof I wasn't a threat. The silhouette mirrored me, raising her fingers in symmetrical slow motion, each joint bending with doll-like smoothness. But where my palm faced outward, hers angled inward, concave, as if she were tracing the space between us rather than addressing me. Rain started outside, first patter, then rush, skittering across slate roofing in urgent applause. The sudden acoustic made the interior hush even more unnatural, as if the storm were playing to an audience that refused to clap back. Time fractured. In the half-light, I saw two Claires at once, one bounding up the foyer rug below, accosted by grocery bags and confusion, the other unveiling a visage that belonged nowhere on the family tree. It was the jagged convergence of parallel lines that should have remained infinite, ordinary reality colliding head-on with its grotesque imposture. And I was the only observer forced to triangulate the impossible physics of both. That instant, caught between the echo of my own scream and the thunderous footfalls of the real Claire charging the stairs, froze like a photograph lit by lightning. A final, glacial blink, and the waxen impostor stood, joints bending with fluid inevitability, as though resuming a performance interrupted centuries ago. She took one step toward me, serene, deliberate, while the stairwell, the house, the very concept of safety collapsed into a narrow corridor of fight-or-flight decisions I barely understood. And in that implausibly extended heartbeat, before reality chose which Claire would remain, I knew with comforting, crushing certainty that the hush had only ever been the creature's waiting room, an antechamber where fear gathered to maturity before stepping into the light. Real Claire burst up the staircase 2 treads at a time, canvas sneakers slapping wood, the grocery bag thumping her thigh in pendulum swings. Her voice, bright, incredulous, a normal girl's voice, ricocheted off plaster. "Jenna, why are all the lights?" She stopped on the mid-landing, eyes snapping to the waxen silhouette just 3 steps above me. In that shard of stillness, I watched recognition die in her expression, replaced first by bewilderment, then by a dawning feral terror that seemed to hollow out her cheeks. Groceries slid from her grasp, apples hit the risers and ricocheted down like billiard balls, each thwack an obscene metronome. Behind Claire, Aunt Linda materialized in the foyer, wrestling an umbrella closed. What on earth? The word earth disintegrated as she looked up and saw 2 daughters, one panting flesh and blood, the other frozen in mid-rise, half turned toward me, face a ghastly negative of the original. I wanted to shout an explanation, but my throat had calcified. What syllable could cover it? Imposter? Ghost? Thing? Every label felt too mundane, too small. I managed a hoarse, "Stay back," but the house swallowed it, as if colluding with the intruder to muffle warnings. The imposter Claire completed her turn toward the stairwell void, presenting her full visage to the lamplight and to the real Claire below. The effect was obscene. Features arranged in the correct topography, but remembered in the wrong material, as though someone had molded a face from candle tallow and then, impatient, pulled it off the mold before it cooled. The eyes remained those polished midnight ovals, catching the flame and flinging it back in warped reflection. Electric panic short-circuited etiquette. I hurtled down 1 step to stand shoulder to shoulder with the imposter. close enough to smell an icy, paraffin-clean coolness radiating from her skin. Up close, the uncanny escalated. Pores were suggested only by subtle stippling, as if an artist had dabbed wax with a sponge to mimic biology. Lashes were individual charcoal strokes, nostrils shallow dents that didn't quite pierce through. Stormlight spilled through the foyer's stained glass transom, casting fractured rainbows that chased up the stairs and splashed across the wrong Claire's dress. Where color should have painted fabric in prism hues, the light merely dulled, swallowed by the material, as though pigment could not root in that unreal textile. Aunt Linda, summoning maternal anger, barked, "Get out of my house!" She expected confrontation, an intruder to flinch, explain, flee. Instead, the creature pivoted its gaze down at her, and something horridly close to a smile tugged at those waxen ridges. Not a human arc of friendliness, but a mechanical widening, skin stretching without creasing, revealing a darkness inside the mouth that looked less like throat and more like unlit corridor. On the other side, step, pause, step, deliberate, testing weight. Wood creaked in slow, exploratory vowels. Each contact vibrated the door frame, transmitting through my shoulder into cartilage and bone. I pictured those lacquer eyes, unblinking, reading the grain of the door as braille, plotting whether to push or simply seep through its seams. Aunt Linda whispered a frantic plan: run for the street, flag a patrol car. But feet on stairs advanced again, now heavier, as if the imposter were accepting the burden of its own impossible mass. Floor 8, 7, 6. I felt screws in the hinges shiver. The stair door exploded open behind us. With a sound like a tree splitting in winter frost, the creature emerged. No sprint, no lunge, simply gliding into view. Wax expression reset to blank serenity, dress unruffled despite the violent entrance. The gaslight at the landing behind her guttered out, plunging the stairwell into raw darkness that framed her silhouette like negative space. For a pulse beat, nobody moved. Rain hammered stained glass. Thunder rolled over the river. It occurred to me that no natural law compelled this thing to chase or flee. It might remain inches away forever, a permanent parasite on our perception. But Aunt Linda wrenched the door wide to East Jones Street, and coastal night wind geysered into the foyer, toppling the umbrella stand, slamming the cabinet door, sweeping cinnamon peels into a frantic swirl. That whoosh finally broke the tableau. Real Claire shrank back. I hurled the heavy stand down the hall toward the imposter, a clumsy spear. It hit her shoulder, bounced off with a dull thunk, and clattered to the floor. She didn't react. Wax. Cars hissed past on rain-soaked cobblestones. Somewhere a bar band vamped on muted trumpet. Life in Savannah rolled on, stupidly ordinary. And from within number 317 came a hush far deeper than silence, as if the building had resumed its earlier breath-holding, saving something dreadful for whoever next crossed its threshold. That collision, two Claires, one doorway, a century-old stairwell suddenly too narrow for reality, would replay in my eyelids for nights to come. But right then, dripping under the gaslit veranda, stomach heaving, I understood only one fact. The imposter hadn't tried to pursue. It hadn't needed to. The house itself was its stage, and we, The errant audience had fled before the second act. A hush dropped so profound, I could hear the saliva click at the back of my own throat. Real Claire, frozen a step below me, shudder exhaled. The imposter tilted her head to that sound. The motion, precisely 90 degrees, both unnatural and mathematically elegant. Like a drafting compass swung by some perverse engineer. Hair, black, lusterless, slid from her cheeks, revealing the face in its entirety. Up close, it resembled candle wax sculpted over a damp porcelain core. The skin contained no freckles, no capillaries, no life. Only a faint translucence around the temples, where lamplight penetrated a few millimeters before dying. Microscopic air bubbles inhabited that waxen flesh, drifting toward the surface as if time itself were slow boiling beneath. Where human eyes should sit, two glossy hemispheres bulged outward, obsidian dark yet faintly marbled, like river stones polished slick by centuries of current. Within each orb a dim crimson filament pulsed, not spherical like a pupil, but radial, flaring and contracting in a flower petal geometry that made my own pupils cramp in sympathetic horror. Her nose existed only by implication. Delicate ridges descending to nostril slits so shallow a breath could scarcely pass. And the mouth, or the thing that posed as one, was a pair of seams, one slightly longer than the other, intersecting in the center like a stitched incision. Those seams began to part. Aunt Linda whimpered. The sound ricocheted off plaster. At that noise, the seams yawned wider, but not downward as human lips do. Instead, they slid apart sideways, peeling the face into quadrants the way rotted wallpaper splits from damp drywall. No teeth greeted us, only a midnight hollow big enough to swallow a candle whole. The interior seemed to absorb light. The deeper I stared, the more depth it suggested, until the void felt cathedral-scaled. A vastness nested in a head but by Euclidean logic could not contain it. She inhaled silently, yet I felt the suction of that breath on my eardrums, as though pressure in the stairwell dropped a few pascals. Every flame in the gas mantles guttered toward her for a heartbeat, sucked by the brief vacuum, then snapped back upright. Drafts reversed direction, pulling house dust into lazy corkscrews that drifted toward her open maw before settling again. It was as if the creature sampled the room, tasting not molecules of air, but intangible things: fear, memory, identity. Then the smile changed. No longer simply parted seams. The quadrants realigned into a full crescent stretching. The edges of her mouth traveled outward, beyond cheek boundaries, beyond sane proportions, until the grin spanned nearly ear to ear. Skin, if it could be called that, crawled with the deformation, embossing ripples that looked like fingerprints dragged through clay. The act produced a noise, crurish, like ice fracturing underfoot. Involuntarily, I swallowed. Her head mirrored the gesture, necklace column tilting, jaw sliding in concert, as though she practiced human mechanics by mimicry. When I inhaled, she inhaled, the wax seams widening a hair further. When I blinked, her lids flickered, first top, then bottom, then top again, in asynchronous mockery of natural order. As I vaulted the final steps to the foyer, I glimpsed one last tableau, the imposter's outline silhouetted against the landing, jaws still agape in that impossible grin, wax droplets pattering the stair like slow rain, her arms beginning to rise, elbows bent oddly backward, wrists drooping, like a marionette whose strings had been jerked by an impatient puppeteer. But that was the apex. The second when fear ceased to be emotional and became physiological, a chemical ripping through muscle fiber, snapping autopilot into control. From there, every action, shoving family through the front door, slamming wood between us and it, fleeing down East Jones under hammering rain, stemmed from the single distilled image of that face. A mask half melted, half alive, carved into neural tissue with the permanence of a brand. Even now, safe and inland, I can close my eyes and see it. Wax skin shimmer, aperture mouth, nightstone eyes. I can smell scorched jasmine and molten paraffin. I can feel the air pressure dip as it breathed me in. That was the moment the house revealed its trespasser. No longer a shape or hush, but a thing with dimensions, scent, and appetite. And the boundary between ordinary and unthinkable split like wet wood beneath. Rain sheeted off the veranda roof in shimmering ropes while we huddled beneath its scant protection. Aunt Linda clutching Claire, Claire clutching her own ribs, me propping the umbrella stand like a lance none of us knew how to wield. Every breath steamed in the sodium orange street lamps. Every blink replayed the waxen grin. But terror has a half-life, and when the minutes piled into 10-minute heaps without pursuit, adrenaline bled into rigid embarrassment. Neighbors' curtains stirred, a porch light clicked on across the street. Aunt Linda found her voice first, steady, pragmatic. We need to be sure it's gone. Keys. I choked out a protest, but the resolve in her eyes resembled anger's older sister, the one who tidies up after fear. She pressed her phone into my palm. 911. You hold the line while we look. Inside, the foyer felt smaller, compressed by humidity and dread. Shards from the split stair door lay across the runner like wooden shrapnel. The gas sconces had guttered out, leaving the house lit only by spasms of lightning and the feeble LED of my phone. The air still reeked. Paraffin, cinnamon, wet jasmine. Yet the metallic note was weaker, as if the imposter had withdrawn the scent the way a snail retracts its slime. When we searched the house, every window was still nailed shut, and there was nowhere for that thing to have gone. A light escaped Aunt Linda a dozen times that night, first to the police dispatcher, then to 2 officers steaming in plastic ponchos, later to the cynical detective at 3 a.m. It became a litany, proof of sanity through repetition. No broken glass, no forced latch, no attic gap wide enough for a raccoon, let alone a woman-shaped horror. We started with the ground floor. Claire flicked every switch. Bulbs buzzed to life. No poltergeist sabotage. The parlor, intact. Crocheted throw still folded with grandmotherly precision. The dining room, polished walnut, untouched save for muddy water dripping from the umbrella stand I'd hurled. The kitchen, grocery carnage. Yes, but purely domestic. The apples had burst. Milk seeped from a cracked bottle in a slow cortical ooze across tile. No wax footprints. No dripping silhouette skulking behind the pantry door. Bathroom next, because nightmares love mirrors. Chips of antique silvering blistered the glass into funhouse galaxies that reflected 3 haggard humans and nothing more. Claire flinched when steam from the hot water pipe clouded the surface. For half a second, each of us seemed to wear the imposter's mask. The stairwell loomed, half in darkness, half in lightning seizure. Splinters from the busted door peppered every tread. I snapped a photo. Later, its metadata would prove we were rational. No phantom, just ruin. Yet a translucent smear glistened on the 7th step, viscous like tree sap. I touched it with a ballpoint pen. The goop clung, cooling instantly to a milky crust. When I scraped it, the shard smelled faintly of birthday candle smoke. Upstairs, Aunt Linda led, flashlight slicing the corridor. The landing sconce was dark, pilot flames snuffed. She twisted the valve, struck a match. With a soft whoomp, light returned, exposing the hallway in sepia. But Claire's bedroom door stood fully ajar. Bedspread still taut. Curtains breathing a lazy pulse. Window latch rusted shut, paint seal unbroken. 8 lonely nails hammered decades ago holding sash to frame. Claire lifted the hem of her desk chair's slipcover. Dust bunnies, nothing more. I knelt by the nightstand. Drawer contained notebooks, earbuds, a spare inhaler. No wax droplet, no crimson filament eye. Guest room, same verdict. Linen closet, towels folded, lavender sachet stale but reassuring. With each negative finding, my hope and unease knotted tighter. Reason offered relief. Imagination insisted on portals, false walls, shifting geometries. Finally, the attic crawl. I hauled the ceiling hatch. Years of paint snapping loose. Hot air exhaled dust. Flashlight beam clanged off rafters and forgotten Christmas decor. No footprints in chalky insulation. Only mouse droppings and a postcard sky of nail tips. Yet I swore the hush up there felt thicker, as if the house had secret lungs and all its breath pooled under the roof. Police arrived as we descended. Officer Diaz, Officer McClellan. Boots squeaking on wet parquet, radios crackling banalities into our private hell. They circled, shone maglights, jotted notes. Diaz tested every sash, even the stained glass transom above the foyer. Immobile, McClellan photographed the wax smear, labeled sample into an evidence tube. Candle or cosmetic? He shrugged. The detective arrived near dawn, tall, methodical, the kind who believes trauma misfiles memories. He listened, examined the wax chip, stared at the stair door ruins. So your intruder melted? His smile carried the weight of paperwork. He left 2 hours later with no suspect, no burglary, no reportable offense beyond property damage and collective fright. After they were gone, the house felt emptier than any vacancy I'd known. Light pooled gold across floorboards. Birds started bickering in the camellia outside. Yet corners stayed darker than physics allowed, as if luminosity negotiated around them out of respect for something lurking. Claire packed an overnight bag using only the brim of the flashlight's beam, never turning her back to the hallway. Aunt Linda typed furiously on her phone. Hotel reservations, locksmith appointments, maybe a listing agent. I hovered by the broken stair door, staring at the gouged jamb where soft pine fibers still wept sap. A finger-width channel lay in the splinter pattern. Precise, smooth, almost melted. The imposter hadn't forced wood, it had softened it, the way heat persuades wax to yield. I pocketed another flake of that residue, sealing it inside a plastic bread bag. Days later, a chem lab friend would swear the sample contained no paraffin or beeswax. Closer to shellac, blended with something unclassifiable, a polymer that shouldn't self-generate. By 9 a.m., we left 317 East Jones Street to the locksmith and the rising sun. From the sidewalk, the house looked picturesque again. Wrought iron balcony, dripping wisteria, gas lanterns extinguished. Nothing amiss except a garbage sack of ruined groceries. Yet every shutter seemed to watch, every brick to pulse faintly, as though the structure itself recorded our departure, like an inhale it could finally release. That night, alone, in my dorm, I scrolled the phone gallery. Stairwell photos, attic photos, blurry doorframe splinters. In one frame, the first shot after officers left, a faint silhouette hovered at the very top landing. a pale ellipse where a face might be, a smear of darkness for hair. I stared until pixels bled together, half hoping it was compression noise, half fearing it was a goodbye wave from something that didn't need exits. The official story remains unchanged. No forced entry, no intruder, windows nailed shut. But the unofficial archive, wax chips, warped photograph, apple bruise on the foyer tile, is mine alone. They are breadcrumbs leading nowhere, proof of a visitor that abides by different cartographies. And whenever humidity thickens with jasmine at night, I swear I hear a house inhale in the distance, holding its breath, waiting for hush to fall, so it can begin again. And weeks bled into months, yet the night of two Claires replayed on a loop inside my skull, as precise and inescapable as the security system timestamps in the car wash story you once heard on this channel. Doctors call it intrusive memory, but that label feels too clinical for something that lives with its own pulse. 1. Immediate fallout. Days 1 to 7. Hotel Lim Police Epilogue. For 2 mornings, officers canvassed East Jones Street. No strangers on ring cams, no wax residue on neighboring porches, no pawn shops accepting antique gas mantles. The detective filed it under unfounded disturbance, stapled to a cost of repairs invoice. Case closed, like a coffin, nailed and labeled, but hollow. The locksmith's verdict: he replaced hinges, but told Linda the splinters looked heat-peeled, almost like someone ran a soldering iron through sugar pie. He laughed when he said it, thought it metaphorical. I heard Claire gag in the hallway. 2. The house refuses to forget. Weeks 2 to 6. Listing limbo. Realtors tried twilight photography, camellias glowing, porch lamps romantic, but lenses kept flaring with translucent streaks across the landing window. Moisture on glass, they shrugged. One editor mailed a proof sheet back. Who's the tall girl on the stairs? There was no girl on set. Sound bleed. Tenants next door reported rhythmic taps on the shared wall at 2 a.m. 5 beats, pause, 5 beats. The same cadence the imposter used to mimic my footstep. They moved out before Halloween. The property record shows lease nullified for structural noises. Occupancy spiraled. Twice the thermostats spiked to 90 degrees Fahrenheit at night, melting a pillar candle clear across the parlor mantle. Candle Linda swears she boxed after Christmas. The wax rippled down the fluted molding, froze in drips uncanny in their familiarity. 3. Personal aftershocks, months 2 to 4. Somatic echoes. I developed contact dermatitis on my fingertips. Tiny blisters shaped like the wax droplets I scraped off the 7th stair. Dermatologists cited stress. I catch myself scratching at night, half expecting molten paraffin to seep from the wounds. Sensory triggers. Jasmine oil? Instant nausea. Birthday candles? Palm sweat. Gastro whoosh? I flinch, smelling iron that isn't there. Therapy loops. EMDR sessions. Stall on one frame. That grin, splitting wider than skin should allow. My eyes dart. The therapist's metronome clicks. The memory refuses to blur. To 4. The wax chip tests. Month 5. A chem lab friend keyed the sample into a mass spec. Result: long-chain hydrocarbons, similar to shellac, but self-polymerizing under room temp. Translation: not beeswax, not paraffin, not available at Hobby Lobby. We froze the fragment. Under minus 20 degrees Celsius, it shrank, attempted to crawl inward, as though preserving a core we still can't see. The freezer light flickered every time we opened the drawer. We stopped opening it. The chip is still there, wrapped in 3 Ziplocs, whispering chemical truths behind frost. 5. Savannah Street lore. Month 6 plus. Tour guides adore East Jones myths, ghost brides, yellow fever orphans. But now they add the double on 317. Teens hold up phones at dusk. Sometimes their TikToks capture a faint silhouette atop the landing. Maybe it's lens flare. Maybe the house enjoys new audiences. Views spike. The algorithm feeds on fear. 6. Claire's reflection. Present day. We meet at cafes with no mirrors. She keeps her hair short now. No curtain for a monster to borrow. Once, in the espresso machine's chrome, her face smeared into wax for half a blink. Steam clouded, and it was gone. She laughed too loudly, said pareidolia. I tasted copper on my tongue. She still dreams of sitting on those stairs, unable to move, while a second self walks in the front door wearing her name like a stolen coat. She wakes to sore jaws. Dentists blame bruxism. I know she's trying to smile in her sleep, wide enough to prove she's real. 7. My door always ajar rule. I moved across town to a 1960s brick apartment. No crawl spaces, no gas lamps, windows that actually open. Yet I jam the bedroom door with a rubber wedge every night, not to keep something out. Doors meant nothing to her, but to hear if it moves. The silence between taps is the meter of my heartbeat. 8. The open ending. The house at 317 East Jones finally sold to a couple from Atlanta. On inspection day, they texted the realtor a single photo. Fresh wax beads on the 7th step, glistening like dew. They assumed a candle party, asked for a cleaning credit, and signed the deed. I wonder what the house will show them, whose face it will borrow next. Will it be theirs, mine, or yours if you ever walk those stairs? Because the truth is simple, horrifying, and unfinished. A nailed shut window can't keep out what copies you from the inside. The double isn't behind the door, it's behind your own reflection, waiting for the hush to settle so it can peel itself forward. Have you ever seen a version of yourself or someone you love where they couldn't possibly be? Tell me in the comments. Maybe if we stitch our stories together, we'll figure out which side of the glass we're really on.